He paid workers $5 a day when the going rate was $2. Critics called him insane. Economists said he'd bankrupt himself within months. Instead, he triggered a revolution that reshaped capitalism, built a fortune worth over $200 billion in today's money, and proved that the path to empire wasn't extraction, it was acceleration. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile. He wasn't even the first to mass-produce one. What he understood, what separated him from every other industrialist of his era, was that real power doesn't come from selling luxury to the wealthy. It comes from making necessities so cheap that millions become dependent on your system. And he was willing to destroy every convention of business to make it happen. The year is 1908. Ford's already launched the Model T, but here's what most people miss. Production is still artisanal. Skilled craftsmen spend days assembling each vehicle by hand. It's profitable, sure, but Ford sees the cage he's trapped in. To scale, he needs more craftsmen. More craftsmen means higher wages. Higher wages mean higher prices. Higher prices mean smaller markets. It's a death spiral disguised as success. Every other manufacturer accepts this as natural law. Ford sees it as a puzzle waiting to be smashed. He starts experimenting, not with the car itself, but with time. How long does it take to install a wheel? How many steps? Can those steps be reordered, eliminated? His engineers think he's obsessing over irrelevant details. They're building cars, not clocks. But Ford understands something they don't. Time is the raw material of industrial power. Whoever controls time controls cost. Whoever controls cost controls markets. 1913, Highland Park, Michigan. Ford unveils the moving assembly line. The reaction is immediate chaos. Workers walk off the job in droves. The system is brutal, repetitive, soul-crushing. Each man performs one task over and over as chassis roll past on conveyor belts. No craftsmanship, no variation, no humanity. Turnover hits 370% annually. Ford is hiring faster than he can train replacements. The whole operation teeters on the edge of collapse, and then he does something nobody sees coming. January 5th, 1914. Ford announces the $5 workday. Not as a raise, as a starting wage. Overnight, he more than doubles what he pays most workers. The business press erupts. The Wall Street Journal calls it economic blasphemy. Competitors predict Ford Motor Company will be liquidated within the year. Even Ford's own investors threaten lawsuits, claiming he's sacrificing profits for publicity stunts. They're all looking at the wrong equation. Ford isn't being generous. He's solving a mathematical problem everyone else is too timid to see. High turnover costs money. Training costs money. Mistakes cost money. But stability? Stability is cheap. $5 a day doesn't just attract workers. It attracts the best workers. People who'll stay. People who'll master their single task until they can do it unconscious. The assembly line only works if the humans become as reliable as the machines. Within weeks, 10,000 men line up outside Ford's factories hoping for jobs. He can now select from the top 1% of applicants. Turnover collapses. Productivity explodes. The time to build a Model T drops from 12 hours to 93 minutes. Costs plummet. Prices drop from $850 to under $300. Sales detonate. By 1918, half of all cars in America are Model Ts. But here's where it gets interesting. Ford isn't just building cars anymore. He's building dependency. Every Model T needs parts, replacement parts, service centers, trained mechanics, fuel infrastructure, roads designed for automotive traffic. His product isn't the vehicle, It's the entire system the vehicle requires to exist. And once that system embeds itself into daily life, extraction becomes effortless. Workers making $5 a day can suddenly afford the very product they're building. Ford creates his own customer base. He's not just employing people, he's conscripting them into an economic loop where their labor funds, their consumption, which funds his expansion, which creates more jobs, which creates more consumers. It's a closed circuit that feeds itself, and he controls the switch. Competitors panic. They try copying the assembly line but can't stomach the wage structure. They try matching the wages but lack the production efficiency to survive it. Ford has built a moat disguised as generosity. The $5 day isn't charity. It's the price of admission to a game where he's already rewritten the rules. By 1920, Ford Motor Company dominates global automotive manufacturing. The Model T accounts for 57% of the world's total car production. Ford's personal wealth eclipses most nations' GDP. He's built the largest private industrial empire in human history, and he did it by recognizing a truth that still governs power today. Control the means of production, and you control commerce. Control commerce, and you influence culture. But control the workers themselves. Turn them into customers. Make them dependent on the very system exploiting them. And you've built something far more valuable than wealth. You've built inevitability. But empires built on inevitability carry a hidden fragility. And Ford's about to discover that controlling the system doesn't mean controlling the variables within it. The system works perfectly until the humans inside it start thinking. 1914. Ford's assembly lines hum with mechanical precision. 50,000 workers move in choreographed repetition. Insert bolt, tighten, move. Insert bolt, tighten, move. 8 hours of identical motion. Every day. Forever. The $5 wage bought compliance, not satisfaction. And compliance has a shelf life. Workers begin calling it the speed up. Managers quietly increase line velocity, shaving seconds off each task cycle. Not enough to protest openly, just enough to extract more output per dollar spent. Bathroom breaks become calculated risks. Conversations disappear. The factory floor transforms into something between workplace and prison. Efficiency becomes indistinguishable from torture. Ford doesn't care. He's obsessed with a different problem. His workers are spending their wages wrong. They're buying alcohol, gambling, living in what he considers squalor. He's paying them enough to afford respectability, but they're choosing chaos instead. This offends his sense of order more than any production delay ever could. So he does what all builders of closed systems eventually do. He attempts to control the variable he can't manufacture: human behavior. 1914, Ford establishes the Sociological Department, not a human resources division, a surveillance apparatus. Investigators visit workers' homes unannounced, inspecting living conditions, checking for cleanliness, interviewing neighbors about drinking habits, church attendance, marital stability. They create files. They assign moral scores. Your wage depends on your compliance. The $5 day comes with conditions now. You must be married or supporting a family. You must demonstrate thrift. You must attend approved churches. You must speak English at home, even if it's not your native language. You must allow inspectors into your private residence whenever they demand entry. The generous wage isn't payment anymore. It's surveillance budget. Workers adapt. They learn to perform respectability. Clean the house before inspection day. Hide the whiskey. Attend church on Sunday. Smile when the investigator asks questions. They're not becoming the citizens Ford wants. They're becoming better actors. The system breeds deception as efficiently as it breeds cars. But Ford miscalculates something fundamental. You can't purchase loyalty, you can rent compliance, you can engineer dependency, but loyalty requires something Ford's model explicitly eliminates. Agency, 1927. After producing 15 million Model Ts, Ford finally admits the design is obsolete. Competitors have surpassed him. Chevrolet offers style, comfort, variety, everything Ford's philosophy rejects. He shuts down production for 6 months, retooling for the Model A. 60,000 workers sit idle. No warning, no severance. The man who created modern wage labor just demonstrated how disposable that labor actually is. The retooling costs $250 million. Ford absorbs it without blinking. He's been extracting value for decades, building reserves that dwarf the temporary disruption. When production resumes, he expects workers to return grateful for the opportunity. Most do. They have no choice. The dependency he engineered works exactly as designed. But something shifts in the cultural foundation. Workers begin recognizing the asymmetry. Ford can halt their income on a whim, but they can't halt his accumulation. He preaches stability while demonstrating none. The psychological contract phrase, United Auto Workers, forms in 1935. Not at Ford initially. General Motors and Chrysler first. But the organizing principle spreads like mechanical knowledge once did. Workers realize they have leverage Ford's system tried to eliminate. Not individual leverage, collective leverage. Ford responds with violence. The Battle of the Overpass, 1937. Union organizers distributing leaflets outside the Rouge plant. Ford's security team, led by Harry Bennett, attacks them with clubs and boots. Photographers capture everything. The images circulate nationally. The man who built his empire on workforce innovation now resembles every brutal industrialist he once claimed to transcend. He fights unionization for 4 more years, deploys spies, fires organizers, threatens families. But the variables have shifted. The National Labor Relations Board backs the union. Public opinion turns. Even Ford's own wife, Clara, threatens to leave him if he doesn't negotiate. 1941. Ford Motor Company becomes the last major automaker to recognize the UAW. The contract he signs eliminates the Sociological Department, ends home inspections, establishes grievance procedures, guarantees wages independent of moral performance. Everything Ford spent decades building, the total control over workers' existence, dismantles in a single agreement. Not because he wanted it, because the system he created generated the very resistance it was designed to prevent. Here's the equation Ford never solved. Efficiency requires standardization. Standardization requires control. But control breeds resentment. And resentment, given enough time and pressure, crystallizes into organized opposition. The assembly line taught workers they were interchangeable parts. The union taught them interchangeable parts could be collectively withdrawn. Ford's health declines through the 1940s. Edsel, his son, dies in 1943. Henry becomes erratic, paranoid, unable to adapt to the world his own innovations created. The company nearly collapses under his deteriorating leadership. His grandson, Henry Ford II, takes control in 1945, stabilizing operations by doing exactly what the elder Ford refused: compromising, negotiating, treating workers as stakeholders rather than components. But the blueprint remains: the assembly line, the wage structure, the closed loop of production and consumption. Every modern corporation still operates inside the framework Ford built. They've just learned to make the cage more comfortable. The broader transformation accelerates regardless. Ford's model spreads globally, not because he licenses it, but because the logic proves irresistible. Toyota studies it, refines it, eliminates waste Ford couldn't see. German manufacturers adopt it, add precision Ford never achieved. The assembly line becomes universal language, the default setting of industrial civilization. Seasonal, variable, tied to daylight and harvest cycles. After Ford, time becomes units. Shift work, clock punching, productivity measured in output per hour. Your grandfather's relationship to work fundamentally differs from your great-great-grandfather's because of decisions made in a Detroit factory between 1913 and 1927. Ford dies in 1947, 83 years old, wealthy beyond measure. The company he built survives him, though it stumbles repeatedly, never quite recapturing the dominance it held when Model T production peaked. His estate, Fair Lane, becomes a museum. Visitors walk through rooms where he entertained Thomas Edison and Harvey Firestone, where he plotted the vertical integration that let him control everything from iron ore to showroom floor. But they don't see the psychological architecture, the way he weaponized wages to eliminate worker autonomy, how he disguised control as benevolence, the surveillance state he normalized inside corporate America. Walk into any modern workplace with productivity monitoring software, keystroke logging, bathroom break tracking. You're walking through Henry Ford's vision, refined with digital precision he could only imagine. The $5 day sounds generous until you map what it purchased, not just labor hours. Complete behavioral compliance. Ford bought the right to dictate how workers spent money he paid them, where they lived, who they married, whether they drank. That's not a wage. It's a lease on human autonomy with the company retaining ownership rights. Every tech company offering free meals, laundry service, sleeping pods. They're not being generous. They're buying the same thing Ford bought. Your time, your presence, your inability to leave the ecosystem they've constructed. The perks aren't benefits. They're golden handcuffs designed exactly like Ford's Sociological Department. Different surveillance methods, same underlying structure, and the assembly line's psychological residue persists everywhere. Why do you feel guilty taking breaks? Because Ford's efficiency metrics embedded productivity anxiety into cultural DNA. Why does getting ahead mean working more hours? Because Ford proved you could extract surplus value by making labor itself the measure of worth. Why do modern jobs fragment tasks into specialized micro-functions? Because Ford demonstrated that de-skilling increases replaceability, which increases employer leverage. Universities now operate on Ford principles: standardized testing, batch processing of students, efficiency metrics that prioritize throughput over depth. Healthcare too. Patient flow, treatment protocols, diagnostic standardization. Even creative industries aren't immune. Content mills, freelance platforms, algorithm-driven distribution, all descendants of the system Ford pioneered. The irony compounds when you examine what Ford actually believed versus what his system produced. He genuinely thought he was liberating workers, providing opportunity, creating prosperity. The cognitive dissonance required to reconcile that self-image with the Sociological Department's invasions, the union-busting violence, the authoritarian control. He never resolved it. Died believing he'd been a benefactor while workers remembered him as a tyrant who happened to pay well. That contradiction defines modern capitalism's central tension. Systems that generate wealth while concentrating power. Efficiency that depends on exploitation. Innovation that requires treating humans as optimizable inputs. Ford didn't invent these dynamics, but he perfected their implementation and proved they could scale indefinitely. His anti-Semitism, which we haven't even fully explored, adds another layer. The Dearborn Independence conspiracy theories, the International Jew publication, his acceptance of Nazi Germany's Grand Cross of the German Eagle in 1938. These weren't peripheral quirks. They emerged from the same worldview that built the assembly line. A conviction that complex systems could be controlled by identifying and eliminating contaminating elements, whether defective parts or undesirable people. The machinery doesn't care about the builder's other beliefs. It runs on its own logic once constructed. Ford's assembly line outlived his bigotry, his paternalism, his entire worldview. What persists is the underlying mechanism, the conversion of human labor into standardized units, the extraction of maximum value through minimum autonomy, the illusion of partnership masking fundamental asymmetry. You're living inside the world Henry Ford built, whether you've ever owned a Ford vehicle or not. The 40-hour work week, consumer credit, suburban sprawl designed around automobile dependency, wage labor as the primary relationship between humans and survival, mass production, mass consumption. The entire apparatus traces back to decisions made by one man who thought he was just building cars more efficiently. And that's the final lesson. Individual intentions matter less than systemic logic. Ford wanted to help workers afford his products. What he actually created was a template for total corporate control that every subsequent industry adopted and refined. The assembly line didn't stop at factory floors. It restructured civilization. The Model T is long obsolete. But the model it represented, the reduction of complexity to repeatable process, the optimization of human effort into mechanical efficiency, that runs everything now. You can't escape it. You can only recognize you're standing on the assembly line Ford built, moving at the speed he set, producing value someone else extracts. Understanding Ford's empire means understanding every smartphone factory in Shenzhen, every Amazon warehouse optimizing human movement down to the second, every gig economy platform converting workers into algorithmic variables. The specifics changed. The architecture didn't. He proved you could build unlimited power not through force, but through dependency. Make people need your system. Make your system their only viable option. Then extract value while calling it opportunity. The genius wasn't mechanical, it was psychological. Ford didn't just manufacture cars. He manufactured consent to a world where efficiency trumps autonomy, where optimization justifies control, where the assembly line never actually stops. It just learned to call itself something else.